"You cannot be serious," she screeched, the sound a grating symphony of pure, unadulterated entitlement that seemed to physically scrape the pleasant morning air. This, this shack is in clear violation of Section 12, subsection C, paragraph 4 of the Community Covenants. It is an affront to the aesthetic harmony of the estates at Whispering Creek. I suppose if you've been following this whole campaign, you'd want to know how it all began. You'd want the origin point of the conflict, the moment the first shot was fired across the bow. That was it. That was the declaration of war, delivered by a plus-sized woman in a shockingly tight polo shirt, standing 10 feet inside my property line, pointing a trembling, sausage-like finger at a structure that had stood on this land for nearly 150 years. If you think a story that starts with aesthetic harmony and ends with federal fraud charges sounds insane, you're right. Hit that subscribe button, as they say, and let me know where you're watching from, because this is a tale that needs to be told. If you have your own nightmare story about a petty tyrant on a homeowners association board, I want to hear it, because these little fiefdoms are sprouting up all over the country. Now let me tell you how this particular war was fought and won. My name is Thomas Shelby. I'm a retired major from the United States Army Corps of Engineers. For 30 years, my world was concrete, steel, hydrology, and logistics. I built bridges in unfriendly places, designed airfields on unstable soil, and planned infrastructure projects that had to withstand everything from monsoon seasons to insurgent attacks. My entire professional life was dedicated to imposing order on chaos through careful planning, meticulous execution, and an unwavering respect for the rules of physics and the laws of the land. When I retired, I wanted only one thing: the absence of conflict. I wanted peace. I came home to the place where that peace was supposed to be guaranteed, the Shelby Mill. It wasn't just a house, it was a legacy. My great-great-grandfather built the grist mill in the 1880s, harnessing the power of the very same Whispering Creek that the new subdivision had co-opted for its pretentious name. The mill itself, a handsome two-story structure of fieldstone and heart pine, had been lovingly converted into a residence by my grandfather after the Depression made its commercial operation obsolete. The 60 acres of land that came with it were a patchwork of old-growth hardwood forest, a few acres of pasture I kept neatly mown, and the deep, cold spring that fed the creek. My family had owned this land, free and clear, since a land grant signed by President Grant. It was an island of history, a bastion of quiet permanence. For most of my life, the land surrounding ours was just that: land. Farms, mostly. But about 5 years before my retirement, a developer bought the 200-acre parcel to our east. In a storm of bulldozers and branding, the estates at Whispering Creek was born. It was a sea of beige houses, each a slight variation of the next, all built with what appeared to be weaponized vinyl siding and architectural shingles. They were perfectly nice, I suppose, if you liked living in a place with all the soul of a spreadsheet. The development's border abutted the eastern edge of my property, a clean line on the county plat map that separated their world of covenants and conformity from my world of history and independence. I had lived in my inherited peace for precisely 7 months before the first incursion. Her name, as I would soon learn from the official notice, was Brenda Frome, and she was the duly elected president of the Whispering Creek Homeowners Association. She had the kind of bearing that suggested she believed her authority was divinely ordained. Her face was perpetually flushed, a combination of righteous indignation and, I suspected, elevated blood pressure. She smelled faintly of cheap floral perfume and hairspray, a chemical combination that felt like an assault on the clean, pine-scented air of my property. "Ma'am," I said, my voice calm and even. It's a tone I perfected over years of dealing with contractors who were behind schedule and over budget. "You are on private property, and you are pointing at my home." "It is an unapproved structure," she insisted, her voice rising in pitch. "It's wood and stone. The approved color palette for all external structures is clearly defined: desert tan, modern khaki, or gentle fawn. This is rustic. It lowers property values." I looked at the mill. The stones were gray and lichen-kissed, solid and immovable. The pine siding was stained a deep, dark brown, the way it had been for a century. It was a part of the landscape, not an imposition upon it. Her houses looked like they had been dropped from the sky by a bored giant. Mine looked like it had grown from the earth itself. "This property is not, nor has it ever been, part of your association," I stated simply. It was a fact, not a point of debate. "The county records are quite clear on that. My deed predates your entire development by about 140 years. Brenda Frome puffed out her chest, the logo on her polo shirt straining against the fabric. It was a vaguely fascistic design involving a stylized willow tree and a swoosh. "We have a duty to maintain the visual corridor of the community. Your dilapidated barn is the first thing people see when they turn onto the main road. We cannot have that. The board has voted. You will be required to bring the exterior into compliance." Dilapidated barn. The words hung in the air. I had spent the first 3 months of my retirement personally inspecting every beam, repointing mortar between the foundation stones, and applying a fresh coat of protective stain to the siding. It was in better condition now than it had been in 50 years. This was not a complaint. This was an invasion. "I will not," I said. The words were quiet, but they were granite. Her eyes narrowed. "You'll be hearing from us, officially." She turned then, her movements stiff with fury, and marched back across the invisible line that separated my world from hers. I watched her go. A slow, dangerous calm settled over me. It was a feeling I recognized. It was the feeling that came after the intelligence brief, after the operational parameters were set. It was the feeling of a mission beginning. I had not sought this conflict, but it had come to my door. Or more accurately, it had trespassed a dozen feet past my door to insult my home. The peace I had craved was over. A new campaign had just begun. The official notice arrived 3 days later. It was not a simple letter. It was a statement. It came in a heavy, cream-colored envelope, the kind of paper stock designed to convey unearned importance. The return address was embossed, not printed. In the top left corner was that same vaguely fascistic logo. The sheer pretension of it was almost impressive. I opened it with the kind of surgical precision I once used to disarm training ordnance. The document inside was on the same thick cardstock. At the top, in an aggressive serif font, were the words, "Official Notice of Violation and Fine Assessment." It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic belligerence. It listed 3 specific violations. Violation 1. Failure to adhere to approved community color palette. Section 12, subsection C, paragraph 4. Violation 2. Unapproved outbuilding exceeding height and material restrictions. Section 9, subsection A, paragraph 2. Violation 3. Presence of natural, unmanicured landscaping. Section 15, subsection B, paragraph 7. Each violation, the letter coldly informed me, carried a fine of $100. But the true genius of its malice was in the next line. Fines are assessed on a per-day basis until the violations are remediated to the satisfaction of the Architectural Review Committee. Then, in bold, underlined text, a special penalty of $200 per day has been assessed for willful non-compliance, bringing the total daily fine to $500. $500 a day. For living in my own home, on my own land. For failing to paint a historic landmark, Gentle Fawn. It was absurd. It was extortion. It was a declaration of total war. I felt a flicker of hot rage, a primal urge to march over to her beige castle and have a very direct, very loud conversation. But that was not my way. Emotion is a tactical liability. Anger is a fire that consumes the angry, not their target. I let the heat pass, and what remained was cold, hard, and sharp. I went to my office. It was a small room on the ground floor of the mill, where the foreman once tallied sacks of grain. The walls were still the original stone. I had a modern desk, a powerful computer, and a set of filing cabinets. It was my command post. From a drawer, I retrieved a new 4-inch D-ring binder. It was heavy, black, and built for serious work. I took out my label maker and carefully typed out a title. I affixed the white strip to the spine. Operation Liberty Parking. Why that name? Because my reconnaissance had to start somewhere. And I had a hunch that this war would be won not on the battlefield of aesthetic opinion, but on the firm, unyielding ground of legal fact. I had a vague memory, a whisper from years ago, about an old agreement my father had made concerning a parcel of land. It was time to bring that memory into sharp focus. I three-hole punched the violation notice. The crisp sound of the paper being pierced was deeply satisfying. I placed it in a clear plastic sleeve and snapped the rings of the binder shut. It was the first piece of enemy intelligence, the first entry in what would become my field manual for this conflict. The war had been declared by Brenda Frome. The terms of my response would be dictated by me, and they would be methodical, overwhelming, and final. Phase 1 of any campaign is reconnaissance. You do not engage the enemy until you know the terrain, their strength, their weaknesses, and most importantly, the rules of engagement. In this case, the enemy's primary weapon was their own rulebook. The covenants, conditions, and restrictions of the estates at Whispering Creek. I downloaded a PDF from their public website. It was a 90-page document of dense, circular legalese. I printed the entire thing, the cost of the ink and paper a minor operational expense. For 2 days, I did nothing but read it. I read it with a highlighter and a red pen, cross-referencing sections, identifying contradictions, and noting procedural requirements. I treated it like an enemy's order of battle. The document was designed to intimidate, to give the impression of absolute authority. But like most such documents, it was riddled with holes, written by lawyers who build by the word and reviewed by developers eager to get to the sales phase. It spoke often of all properties within the community, but its own definitions section referenced a specific set of plat maps filed with the county. That was the first thread to pull. It mandated a complex appeals process, but required that the board provide certified mail notice of any hearing, a detail I noted with interest. It gave the Architectural Review Committee, chaired by Brenda herself, sweeping power, but stipulated that their decisions must be reasonable and not arbitrary. That was a subjective but legally significant phrase. After dissecting their playbook, I moved on to the terrain itself. I drove to the County Hall of Records. It was a sterile, quiet building that smelled of old paper and floor wax. I spent an entire day pulling every document related to my property and the adjacent development. The deeds, the surveys, the original plat maps. I laid them out on a large table, the crisp old paper of my family's deeds contrasting with the glossy modern survey maps of the estates. And there it was, the key, the linchpin of the entire operation. My 60-acre parcel was shaped like a fat letter L. The long part of the L was the mill, the woods, and the pasture. The short, bottom part of the L jutted out along the main county road. It was a 5-acre rectangle of land that my grandfather had designated for commercial use back in the 1950s, hoping to attract a diner or a gas station. That had never happened. Instead, in the late 1990s, a small, unassuming strip mall was built there. It contained a laundromat, a pizza place, a martial arts studio, and a small, rentable community hall. In front of it was a large, paved parking lot. I remembered my father, a quiet man who valued good neighbors, making a handshake deal with the developer of that strip mall. He had leased them the land for a pittance, on the condition that they maintained it. That lease had long since expired, reverting to a month-to-month tenancy, but the rent was still paid electronically into the estate's account. More importantly, I owned the land. All of it. The buildings, the asphalt, every single parking space. He was a man who looked like he had been slowly worn down by decades of trivial complaints about overgrown lawns and unpermitted sheds. He had the weary, impassive look of a professional bureaucrat. I didn't present a complaint. I presented a case file. I laid out the plat maps, my deed, the zoning designation for my parcel, historic/commercial, and the zoning for the estates, R1 residential. I then showed him the violation notice from the HOA. "Mr. Henderson," I began, "I am here to ask for a clarification of jurisdiction. This is my property." I tapped the map. "And this is theirs." The Whispering Creek HOA is attempting to enforce its internal residential covenants, specifically aesthetic rules regarding paint color and landscaping, on my legally separate, commercially zoned, historic property. They are also levying significant daily fines for non-compliance. He looked at the notice, his eyes scanning the aggressive font and the itemized list of violations. He looked back at the plat map. He traced the property line with his finger. For the first time, a flicker of interest appeared in his tired eyes. The bureaucratic mask slipped, revealing the sharp mind of an expert. "They're trying to enforce their color palette on the old Shelby Mill?" he asked, a note of disbelief in his voice. "I fished that creek since I was a boy. That mill is a county landmark." "That's correct," I said. "They consider it an unapproved outbuilding." A slow smile spread across his face. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who had just been handed a very large, very clear-cut violation to prosecute. Petty tyrants were his natural enemy. "Major Shelby," he said, his tone now crisp and professional, "an HOA has zero authority outside the legal boundaries of its development, as defined by the covenants and the filed plat map. Attempting to enforce their rules on an adjacent property, especially one with a different zoning designation, is a massive overreach. Levying fines is, well, that's bordering on attempted extortion." He turned to his computer and began typing. "I am opening a formal inquiry into the practices of the estates at Whispering Creek HOA. We will be sending a letter of inquiry to their registered agent demanding they provide the legal basis for their actions. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. You've been very thorough." I had a new document for the binder, a copy of the official county inquiry request, complete with a case number. This was my air support. The battle was no longer just my word against Brenda's. I now had the government on my side, but a successful campaign requires more than just air support. It requires ground troops, an insurgency. I knew I couldn't be the only person being terrorized by this woman. Tyranny is never satisfied with a single subject. It requires a population to oppress. It was time to recruit. I spent the next week engaged in what the Army calls human intelligence gathering. I took walks through the estates at Whispering Creek at different times of day. I was not looking for friends. I was looking for signs of oppression. And I found them everywhere. I saw a pristine lawn marred by a small yellowing patch of grass where a plastic playhouse had recently been removed. I saw the faint outline of a basketball hoop's backboard against a garage, though the hoop itself was gone. I saw houses with brand new shutters, painted a slightly different shade of beige from their neighbors, a clear sign of a forced upgrade. These were the scars of Brenda's reign. My first contact was an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable. She was tending her rose bushes, her movements slow and careful. Her front garden bed was immaculate, except for one small, bare patch of mulch near her door. "Good morning," I said, offering a neighborly smile. "Your roses are beautiful." She looked up, startled. People in the estates didn't seem to talk to strangers. "Oh, thank you," she said, her voice a little shaky. "They were my husband's pride and joy. I'm Thomas Shelby. I live over at the old mill." Her eyes widened slightly. "Oh, you're the one. The one? The one Brenda is talking about in her email blasts. Excellent." My reputation preceded me. I was already the designated enemy. This made things easier. "I imagine she's not saying very complimentary things," I said with a dry chuckle. "I received a notice from her myself." Mrs. Gable's face clouded over. She looked down at the bare patch in her garden. "She's a terrible woman," she whispered, as if Brenda might have surveillance devices hidden in the azaleas. "She made me get rid of my gnomes." "Your gnomes?" "I had 3. A little family. They sat right there. My grandchildren gave them to me. She said they were unapproved decorative statuary and fined me $25 a day until I removed them. I couldn't afford it. My husband, he's on a fixed income." The sheer pettiness of it was breathtaking. Weaponizing the HOA's power against an old woman's garden gnomes. "Mrs. Gable," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "did you keep the violation notice? Do you have any emails or letters from her about this?" I think so. I keep everything." "Would you be willing to make a copy for me? I am compiling a record of the board's activities. Your story is important." She hesitated for a moment, fear warring with a lifetime of being told to stand up for what's right. Justice won. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger now. "Yes, I will." I had my first insurgent. My next recruits were the Martinez family. I found them in their driveway. Mr. Martinez was staring glumly at the wall of his garage, while his 2 young sons sat on the curb, looking bored. The ghost of the basketball hoop was clear as day on the vinyl siding. I introduced myself and explained my situation. Mr. Martinez, a young engineer named David, listened intently. "She did the same to us," he said, his voice tight with anger. "We got a notice 2 weeks ago. Unapproved recreational apparatus. $100 a day. I took it down because my wife was worried. But it's not right. This is our home. My boys should be able to shoot hoops in their own driveway." "Did she follow the proper procedure?" I asked. "Did she send the notice via certified mail, as required by your own covenants?" David frowned. "No. It was just stuck in our door." "Why?" Because according to Section 24 of your CC and RS, any notice of violation that includes a fine must be delivered by certified mail to be considered legally served. If it wasn't, then the fine is invalid. His eyes lit up. He had been fighting on emotion. I had just handed him a weapon forged from his enemy's own rulebook. Keep a record of everything, David, I advised. Every email, every letter, every conversation. Date, time, subject. Be meticulous. There may be a time coming when we need to present a united front. He nodded, a new determination on his face. You can count on me. The seeds of rebellion were planted. Brenda Frome, in her arrogance, saw these people as isolated targets. She never imagined they would organize. She never imagined they were being recruited by a man who spent his life turning disparate assets into a coordinated, effective force. With my initial intelligence gathered and my local assets cultivated, it was time to bring in the heavy artillery. A campaign of this nature required specialized legal firepower. I needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but someone who understood the unique dynamics of this kind of conflict. I found him through a network of fellow veterans. His name was Jack Corrigan. He was a retired JAG colonel, a man who had spent 30 years prosecuting and defending cases within the rigid, unforgiving structure of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. He now ran a small private practice specializing in real estate and contract law. His website had a specific section on HOA disputes. He was perfect. We met in his office, a modest but orderly space lined with law books and a few framed commendations. He was a tall, lean man with sharp eyes and an air of quiet competence. He listened without interruption as I laid out the situation, my narrative crisp and chronological. Then I placed the binder on his desk. Operation Liberty Parking, he read aloud from the spine, a slight smile touching his lips. He opened it. He spent the next 20 minutes in silence. Turning the pages, he saw the initial violation notice, the high-resolution photos of my property, the highlighted copy of the HOA covenants, the plat maps, the deeds, the official inquiry letter from the county, and my detailed notes on the recruitment of Mrs. Gable and the Martinez family. When he was done, he closed the binder and looked at me. The look in his eyes was one of pure, professional appreciation. "Major," he said, the honorific coming naturally to him. "This isn't a case file. This is a kill box. You've done 90% of my work for me. You've established jurisdiction, documented the overreach, identified procedural failures, and started building a class of affected parties. It's beautiful." "I believe in thorough preparation, Colonel," I replied. Clearly," he said, his smile widening. "Brenda Frome has no idea what's coming, does she? These HOA presidents, they run on ego and intimidation. They fold the second they're confronted with structured, overwhelming opposition. They're bullies, and bullies are cowards." We spent the next hour mapping out the legal counter-salvo. The strategy was not to simply defend, but to attack. "She's already made several critical errors," Jack explained, ticking them off on his fingers. "The jurisdictional overreach is the big one. The county will have a field day with that. The procedural failure on the Martinez notice invalidates that fine completely. The harassment of Mrs. Gable is a potential violation of fair housing laws, depending on how we frame it. But the real prize is this." He tapped the plat map showing the commercial lot. "The fact that they operate on your land, that's the lever that will break them." The plan was simple. Jack would draft a formal cease and desist letter. It would be delivered not just to the HOA's official address, but to Brenda Frome's home address. and personally to each member of her board. The letter would be a masterpiece of controlled aggression. It would state in no uncertain terms that the HOA had no authority over my property. It would cite the specific county codes and state statutes they were violating. It would reference the active case file with county code enforcement. It would demand the immediate rescission of all fines and a formal letter of apology. It would inform them that any further communication should be directed only to my legal counsel. And it would gently, almost casually, remind them that as board members, they could be held personally liable for damages and legal fees incurred as a result of their actions. But the most important part was what the letter would not say. It would not mention my ownership of the parking lot or the community hall. "We hold that in reserve," Jack said, a predatory gleam in his eye. "That's our ace in the hole. We let her react to this first wave of pressure. A person like this won't back down. She'll escalate. She'll dig her own hole deeper. And when she's at the bottom of it, convinced of her own righteousness, we'll pull the ladder up and bury her in it." I left his office feeling 10 feet tall. It was the feeling of having a superior strategy, superior intelligence, and now superior firepower. The binder on my passenger seat felt heavier, no longer just a collection of documents, but a war chest. Brenda Frome was about to walk into a trap she couldn't see, a trap she was building for herself with every arrogant email and every petty fine. The paper assault was coming. The cease and desist letters, drafted by Jack and delivered by a professional process server, had the intended effect of a well-placed smoke grenade. It created confusion, panic, and, from the enemy commander, blind rage, according to my sources inside the estates. Mrs. Gable had become a surprisingly effective intelligence node, gathering whispers from the community garden. The board members were terrified. They were mostly weak-willed sycophants who had signed on for the minor prestige, not for a legal battle that threatened their personal bank accounts. But Brenda, as Jack had predicted, did not retreat. She viewed the legal letter not as a warning, but as a challenge to her authority. Her response was to escalate, drastically. 2 days after the letters were served, a new notice was posted on the community bulletin board, the one in the lobby of the building on my property. It announced a special executive hearing of the Architectural Review Committee. The sole item on the agenda was listed as Review and Enforcement Action Regarding Property 1412 Old Mill Road. My address. It was a show trial, and I was the guest of honor. This was a gift. She was moving the conflict from the shadows of threatening letters to a public forum, a forum where I could control the narrative. But before that could happen, she made another, even more critical blunder. She decided to launch a direct physical assault. It happened on a Wednesday morning. I was in my workshop, cleaning and oiling some old hand tools, when I heard the rumble of a heavy truck coming down my long gravel driveway. I looked out the window to see a large landscaping truck, the logo Frome Landscaping and Design emblazoned on its side. 3 men in matching green t-shirts got out, armed with chainsaws and heavy-duty loppers. I knew instantly who they were and why they were here. Frome Landscaping. Brenda's cousin's company, as Mrs. Gable had informed me. This was an attempt to remediate the unapproved natural growth by force. Specifically, they were heading toward a magnificent 200-year-old white oak that stood near the property line, a tree my great-grandfather had specifically spared when he cleared the land for the mill. I felt that cold calm settle over me again. I retrieved my phone and a clipboard from my office. On the clipboard were 3 documents: a copy of my property survey, a copy of my deed, and a copy of the cease and desist letter Jack had sent. I started recording video on my phone and walked out to meet them. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, my voice pleasant but firm. I stopped them a good 20 feet from the oak tree. The foreman, a burly man with a sunburned neck, looked at me with annoyance. "We've got a work order from the HOA to clear some brush and take down a hazardous tree," he grunted, gesturing vaguely toward the oak. "I see," I said. "And did the person who gave you that work order, a Miss Brenda Frome, I presume, inform you that you are currently on private property? That this land is not part of the HOA?" He hesitated. "She said it was community property." "She was mistaken," I said, holding up the clipboard. "This is a registered county survey map. As you can see, that property marker over there indicates the boundary. You are well inside my property. This document is the deed, proving my ownership. And this," I added, tapping the third paper, "is a letter from my attorney informing Miss Frome and her board to cease and desist all contact and actions related to my property. By being here, at her direction, you are now party to a criminal trespass. If you so much as scratch the bark on that tree, you and your company will be party to destruction of property, a felony in this state, with damages likely to be assessed in the tens of thousands of dollars for a heritage tree like that. I will hold your company, and you personally, liable." The foreman's bravado evaporated. He looked from the papers to the ancient oak tree, then back to my calm, unblinking eyes. He was a working man, not an ideologue. He was here to earn a paycheck, not catch a felony charge for Brenda Frome's personal vendetta. "Look, mister, I don't want no trouble," he said, taking a step back. "We were just told to do a job. And I am telling you that the job you were told to do is illegal. I suggest you pack up your equipment and leave my property immediately." As if on cue, a car came speeding down the road and screeched to a halt at the end of my driveway. Brenda Frome flung the door open and stormed toward us, her face a mask of purple fury. My phone was still recording, capturing everything. "What is going on here?" she shrieked at the foreman. "Why aren't you working? I told you to take that ugly thing down." "This gentleman says it's his property, Brenda," the foreman said, his voice pleading. "He's got papers. He's talking about lawyers and felonies." Brenda turned her rage on me. "This is HOA common land. You are interfering with official community business." "This is my land, Miss Frome," I said, my voice as level as a surveyor's transit. "And you are currently being recorded ordering this man to commit a crime on it. Every word you say is being added to the evidence file against you." For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes. The mention of a recording, of an evidence file, seemed to penetrate her bubble of self-importance. She was a creature of backroom bullying and anonymous notices. Direct, documented confrontation in the light of day terrified her. She sputtered for a moment, unable to form a coherent sentence. Then she pointed a trembling finger at me. "You will be sorry. You will be buried in fines at the hearing." She stormed back to her car and sped away. The foreman and his crew, looking immensely relieved, packed up their chainsaws and beat a hasty retreat. I stopped the recording. The video file was saved and immediately backed up to the cloud. It was the crown jewel of my opposition research. Brenda Frome, on camera, ordering criminal action and then fleeing when confronted with the law. It was perfect. The fallout from her failed assault was immediate. That evening, I received a phone call from a blocked number. "Is this Major Shelby?" A nervous, reedy voice asked. "It is." My name is Arthur Finch. I'm the treasurer of the HOA. He sounded terrified. I saw what happened this morning. I was on the board call when Brenda ordered her cousin to go to your property. I told her it was a bad idea. She's out of control. The lawyer's letter. Her trying to use our funds to damage your property. I can't be a part of this. I listened patiently. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The inside source. The defector. Every corrupt regime has them. The ones who are not evil, merely weak, and can be frightened into doing the right thing. What do you want, Mr. Finch? I asked. I want out, he said, his voice cracking. And I want to give you something. I have the financials. All of them. The bank statements, the expense reports. She runs the HOA like her personal piggy bank. She's been paying her cousin's company a fortune for grounds maintenance that never happens. She used the HOA debit card to buy a new patio set for her house. Claimed it was for the community beautification project. It's all there. I have copies. Can you get them to me? Yes. I'll leave a flash drive in your mailbox tomorrow morning before sunrise. Just, please don't mention my name. She'll ruin me. Your secret is safe, Mr. Finch. You're doing the right thing. I hung up the phone. The final piece of the puzzle had just fallen into place. I had her on jurisdictional overreach. I had her on procedural violations. I had her on harassment. I had her on camera attempting to order criminal trespass and destruction of property. And now, I had her on embezzlement. The show trial she had called was no longer her stage. It was my kill box. And all of her residents were about to have front row seats to the fireworks. The night of the special executive hearing arrived. The battleground was the community hall, a soulless, fluorescent-lit room with a linoleum floor and stackable chairs. It smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. I arrived early, along with Jack Corrigan, David Martinez, and Mrs. Gable. We were the command element of this little insurgency. I was carrying a briefcase. It contained my binder, a laptop, and a small, high-lumen digital projector. Jack had reviewed my plan of attack and approved it with a grin. It's a classic counter-ambush, Major. Let them walk right into the kill zone, then hit them from all sides. Residents began to filter in. There were far more than usual for a board meeting. Word had spread. My confrontation with the landscapers had become the stuff of local legend. The email blast Brenda had sent out, full of furious, semi-coherent accusations against me, had backfired, piquing everyone's curiosity. They came expecting a spectacle. They were not going to be disappointed. Brenda Frome and her two remaining board members, a timid-looking woman named Carol and a grumpy old man named Stan, sat at a folding table at the front of the room. Arthur Finch, the treasurer, was conspicuously absent, having tendered his resignation that morning via email, citing health reasons. Brenda looked flustered but defiant. She banged a small, toy-like gavel on the table. This special hearing is now in session, she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the tense room. The sole agenda item is the non-compliance of property 1412 Old Mill Road with community standards. Major Shelby, as the property owner, you have been summoned to account for your violations. She looked at me, expecting me to approach the table and argue about paint colors. I remained seated. Miss Frome, I said, my voice carrying easily through the room. Before we discuss any alleged violations, I have a point of order. A matter of jurisdiction that must be clarified for all residents present. I walked to the front of the room, set up my projector on a small table, and aimed it at the blank wall behind her. With a click of my laptop, A crystal-clear image of the county plat map appeared on the wall. A thick red line demarcated the boundary of the estates at Whispering Creek. My property, including the building we were all currently sitting in, was clearly outside that line. As you can all see from the official county records, I began, using a laser pointer to trace the boundary. My property is not, and has never been, a part of this homeowners association. Therefore, the HOA has no legal authority, zero, to enforce its covenants, its architectural rules, or its schedule of fines upon me or my property. Your actions constitute illegal harassment, and the county's Code Enforcement Office is already investigating them under case number 741 Delta. A murmur went through the crowd. Brenda's face went from flushed to pale. Furthermore, I continued, my voice cold and precise, there is the matter of our present location. This community hall, this parking lot, indeed this entire commercial complex, is located on Parcel 4B of the Shelby Mill tract. In other words, you are holding a hearing to levy illegal fines against me in a building that you rent, that sits on land that I own. The murmur turned into a wave of shocked gasps. I had just detonated the first and largest bomb of the evening. People were looking at the floor, then at the walls, then at me, then at a sputtering Brenda Frome, as if seeing their world for the first time. That's a lie, Brenda stammered, but there was no conviction in her voice. The map was on the wall for all to see. It is a legally verifiable fact, Jack Corrigan said, standing up. His voice was calm but carried the weight of absolute authority. My name is Jack Corrigan. I am Major Shelby's legal counsel. Any further attempt by this board to harass my client will result in immediate legal action seeking significant damages. I clicked the projector off. I have no further comments on the violations, I said, returning to my seat. But I believe some other residents have matters they wish to bring before the community. As planned, Mrs. Gable stood up. She was holding a small ceramic garden gnome. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was clear. Brenda Frome, you fined me $25 a day for this. This was a gift from my granddaughter. You bullied me and you made me feel small. That is not what a neighbor does. Then David Martinez stood up. And you fined me $100 a day for my son's basketball hoop, and you didn't even have the decency to follow your own rules for notifying me. You are denying our children a place to play because it offends your sense of order. One by one, a dozen other residents stood. A woman fined for having a wind chime. A family cited because their trash can was visible from the street for 2 hours past the deadline. A man forced to resod his entire lawn because of a patch of clover. The trickle of complaints became a flood. The narrative of the meeting was no longer about my non-compliance. It was about Brenda Frome's pattern of systemic abuse and petty tyranny. The mood in the room had turned from curiosity to open hostility, all of it directed at the woman at the front table. Brenda was frantically banging her toy gavel, but no one was listening. Her authority had evaporated. It was time for the coup de grace. I walked back to the projector. One last item, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. The room fell silent. I clicked the projector back on. This time it displayed a spreadsheet, a copy of the HOA's financial records obtained from Arthur Finch. These are your financials, I said to the crowd. I want to draw your attention to a few line items. I used the laser pointer. Here we see monthly payments of $5,000 to Frome Landscaping and Design for common area maintenance. Yet, as we all know, the only common areas are the small strips of grass by the entrance, which are mowed by a different service. Frome Landscaping, it should be noted, is owned by Brenda's cousin. A wave of angry shouts erupted. And here, I continued, pointing to another section, is the Community Beautification Discretionary Fund. We see a charge for $800 at Patio Palace. I believe that corresponds to the lovely new wicker furniture that recently appeared on Miss Frome's back deck. The room exploded. The last vestiges of her support vanished in a firestorm of betrayal. They had been paying for her corruption, funding her vendettas, and subsidizing her lifestyle. This board is corrupt and incompetent, I declared into the chaos. It has opened this community up to multiple lawsuits and a county investigation through its illegal actions. Its president has been using your money to enrich her family and herself. I let that sink in. Then I delivered the final calculated blow. Therefore, I propose a motion, I said loudly. I move that the HOA levy an immediate special assessment of $200 per household. This is to create a legal defense fund to pay for the lawyers you will need to defend against the county investigation, the lawsuit I am filing for harassment, and the other lawsuits that are sure to come from residents like Mrs. Gable and the Martinezes, all a direct result of this board's actions. That was the kill shot. I had turned the financial consequences of Brenda's actions directly back onto the residents. The idea of paying $200 for her corruption was the final straw. "No!" someone yelled from the back. "She should pay for it." "I agree," I said calmly. "But the HOA is liable, which means you are liable, unless you take action." David Martinez stood up, as we had rehearsed. "I make a motion for a vote of no confidence in the entire board, and for their immediate removal from office, effective immediately." Mrs. Gable shot to her feet. "I second the motion!" Brenda was speechless, her face a grotesque mixture of shock and rage. Her two board cronies looked like they wanted to be swallowed by the linoleum. "All in favor of the motion to remove the board," David yelled. The response was a deafening, unanimous roar of "aye" that shook the cheap ceiling tiles. All opposed? Silence. Utter, complete, humiliating silence. "The motion carries," David declared into the quiet. "Brenda, Carol, Stan, you are removed. Get out!" It was over. The regime had fallen. Brenda Frome, stripped of her power, her corruption laid bare, simply stared for a long moment. Then, with a strangled cry of fury, she grabbed her purse, knocked over her chair, and fled the room. The jeers and angry shouts of her former subjects following her out into the parking lot. My parking lot. The aftermath was swift and decisive. In the vacuum of power, the community, energized and united for the first time, acted. David Martinez was elected the interim president. A shaken but resolute Mrs. Gable was named vice president. Two other reasonable residents volunteered to fill the remaining seats. Their first official act, passed by unanimous vote right there in the hall, was to rescind every fine levied by Brenda's board over the past year. Their second act was to issue a formal written apology to me and to every other family that had been targeted. Their third was to hire an independent forensic accountant to go through the books and determine the full extent of Brenda's fraud. As the meeting broke up, a sense of profound relief and celebration filled the air. People were smiling, shaking hands, introducing themselves to neighbors they had only known as the occupants of the beige house next door. The atmosphere of fear had been replaced by a spirit of community. Jack and I stepped outside into the cool night air. As we did, we saw Brenda fumbling with her car keys, her hands shaking with rage. Jack walked calmly over to her. "Brenda Frome," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "You've been served." He placed a thick envelope on the hood of her car. It was the official notice of my personal lawsuit against her for harassment, attempted destruction of property, and defamation. She stared at it as if it were a venomous snake, before snatching it up and getting into her car. She drove away, her tires squealing in a final, impotent display of fury. The legal and financial consequences for her were catastrophic. The county investigation, armed with the evidence from the forensic accountant and Arthur Finch's testimony, resulted in multiple charges of fraud and embezzlement. To pay for her criminal defense and settle my civil suit, she was forced to sell her house, the one with the HOA-funded patio furniture, and move out of the community she had terrorized. Her reign was over, not with a whimper, but with the clang of a courthouse door. In the weeks that followed, the estates at Whispering Creek began to heal. The oppressive beige conformity slowly gave way to individuality. Mrs. Gable's gnome family returned to their post in her garden, soon joined by a few plastic flamingos. David Martinez's sons played basketball in their driveway every afternoon, the sound of the bouncing ball a happy rhythm of restored normalcy. To foster this new spirit, I made a gesture of my own. I had Jack draw up a formal lease agreement for the commercial lot where the community hall stood. The rent was $1 per year, for a term of 99 years. The contract explicitly guaranteed access for all residents and stipulated that the facilities could never be used to restrict or intimidate any member of the community. It was an ironclad guarantee that no future Brenda Frome could ever again use my property as a weapon against her neighbors. To sign the lease and celebrate our collective victory, I hosted a barbecue on the grounds of the mill. I fired up a large smoker, and David organized a potluck. For the first time, the residents of the beige houses crossed the property line not as invaders or supplicants, but as welcome guests. They saw my home not as a dilapidated barn, but as a piece of shared local history. Their children played tag in the pasture and explored the woods by the creek. We ate, we drank, and we celebrated the simple, profound peace that comes from overthrowing a petty tyrant. Now, months later, that peace has settled back over my life. I sit on my porch in the evenings, watching the fireflies rise from the pasture. The sounds from the neighboring development are no longer the shrill pronouncements of a petty dictator, but the happy noises of children playing and neighbors chatting over fences. The war is over. The binder, Operation Liberty Parking, sits on a shelf in my office. Its work is done. It is a monument to a conflict I never wanted, but was forced to fight. It serves as a reminder that freedom, whether on a national scale or in a small suburban neighborhood, is not a given. It must be defended. It proves that one person, armed with discipline, methodical preparation, and the simple, unassailable truth, can stand against tyranny and win. The peace I enjoy now is not the passive peace of retirement I had originally sought. It is a peace I fought for, a peace I earned. And that, I have discovered, is the most satisfying peace of all.